Makita. My name's Fiona Hammersley-Chambers, and I'm the owner-operator of Metchosin Farm, and I work professionally as an ethnobotanist. Most of my work really centers around traditional plant foods. Like most farmers, I was sitting there with the seed catalogs one spring and looking for my favorite variety of spinach that I was going to grow, and it was gone from all the catalogs at the same time. And then it turned out that they were all buying this particular spinach variety from the same international supplier, and they weren't growing it anymore. And that really started my journey with seeds. There's no food sovereignty really without seed sovereignty. I was an organic farmer. I had no idea that anything was even broken in our system. Yeah. One of the things that we've been doing here at Metchosin Farm is just trying to create and increase the diversity in our food crops. So this bin, for example, this is nothing but tomato seeds, and yeah, each one of these is a different variety. This one, for example, is Metchosin Pink, and this is a tomato variety that we created. We have about 260 varieties that we grow. We only sell what we grow here, so we're not a reseller. They've estimated that in the last 100 years, we've lost about 94% of our food seeds here in North America. That's catastrophic, and it means that someone like myself who's a plant breeder and a plant steward, I have access to 6% of the genetic material that someone doing my job 100 years ago had access to. When COVID hit last spring, it was a little crazy around here. We quite literally over the course of a week got discovered, and our seed sales went up 5,000%. In 10 weeks, we did 9 years worth of seed sales. What that really means is that we helped over 800 individuals, families, and community groups grow a food garden. Put just a little bit of water in there, not too much, just enough to get it going. One of the things that COVID really exposed is the weaknesses in this international supply chain. Like, if you who are watching this, if you just go in your kitchen, how much of the food in your fridge actually came from your bioregion? If you support your local bioregion and your local farmers, you know where that food's coming from, and the money that you're spending is staying in your community. It's worth investing in your food shed. So when you have heirloom genetics, you tend to have wider genetic diversity. That's one of the reasons that they can adapt so well to lots of different growing environments. When they're so hybridized and they're so narrow in the environment that they'll thrive in, is you throw different variations like climate change, salinity, acute rainstorms, and they can't handle it. This, for example, is rattlesnake pole bean, but you can see within here you've actually got some different groupings. And in fact, this is how, in many ways, new varieties are created. So say, for example, these were growing in the garden and it was a particularly wet year, and for whatever reason, the beans that are more brown did better in that wet soil and that colder temperature. You might pull those out and you might start isolating those and growing them out year after year and selecting for this color.
I have some beans that we haven't identified yet.
Love those ones.
Something that I also haven't identified yet, but looks like rattlesnake, but it's not.
I think my favorite part of growing seeds is not necessarily maintaining the heirlooms. I mean, that's a great part of it. You're keeping that relationship going. But my favorite part are the mistakes. It's like, oh, bleep, bleep, these crossed, oops. And then suddenly you've got this new variety that is like, oh, wow, that's amazing. That was a complete accident, but it's great. With the chard, what I've done is crossed in a British chard variety. It's called Ford Hook Giant. And that variety was selected and bred out of sugar beet genetics. So it's really sweet. With the cross of the Ford Hook Giant into the bright lights and the rainbow chard, what's happening is we're getting much wider stems and they're much sweeter. I really like these dual tone stems. We have about 2 acres that we grow the crops in. You need to keep tabs on things like minimum population numbers for genetic health. Did you have any disease issues? Maybe we're in our 5th or 6th generation of that particular seed crop, but where did those original genetics come from? Or where have I added genetics in over time? These are our individual seed crop record sheets, and they have information like the varietal, the subcategory, and that's just page 1. So it's been estimated that in North America we've lost about 90% of our apple varieties in the last 100 years, and it's about 8 to 10 years before those new plants actually flower and fruit and you know what you've got. So this is our Metchosin apple tree, started from seed by me and my kids years ago from a particularly good Gravenstein apple. I'm in the middle of doing my PhD in ethnobotany with Dr. Nancy Turner, and my funding came from the Hackeye Institute. And what do you get, folks, who have everything they need? You create an apple variety for them. So yeah, that's the Hackeye apple tree. It's a great apple. Squeeze something else. Yeah, they are precious. The taller plants are red huckleberry, so they're a vaccinium, they're a cousin of blueberries. And in my PhD research, we're working with a halsic, looking at what happens when you apply traditional methods of fertilizing to these plants. The fertilizer that the halsic used traditionally for berry gardens was things like the waste from processing fish, like salmon, and also things like clamshells that would be crushed up and added to the soil, or wood ashes as well. And if you know anything about soil biology, changing the pH on the coast here, like our soils are really acidic. So when you add calcium, clamshells, that's really a buffer. It's the perfect mix. Like, a scientist couldn't have created it better. And look at the difference. Fertilizer, no fertilizer. Fertilizer, 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 no fertilizer. There is this just pervasive myth still here on the coast that somehow people here were hunters and gatherers or complex hunters and gatherers, and it's actually kind of insulting if you look at the linguistics, if you look at the archaeological record, and you look at the ethnographic record. There are equivalent or direct terms for pretty well all the cultivation words. So tilling, fertilizing, weeding, transplanting. And if you think about it, we have a long history with plants and with seeds. As a mammal, you're often the desired target of a plant. So you're really working for the plants. Mm-hmm. So a tomato has that color and that sweetness and that flavor because you are designed to come along and be attracted by that, and then you eat it, and you move the seeds away from the parent plant with a pile of convenient fertilizer, and that's where they grow from. So that was kind of the reciprocal arrangement. Ours is a little out of whack now with industrial agriculture. What we do is something that you can do. Even if you live in an apartment 6 stories up and you've got a little balcony, you can still grow a pot of peas or nasturtiums and save some of those seeds. Or if you go to the grocery store, save some seeds. Or if you get an apple, take one of those seeds, put it in your houseplant. That's how we got the Metchosin and the Hackeye apples. It was my kids saying, "Oh, Mom, that's a really nice fat seed." And I said, "Oh, well, let's throw it in the houseplant." And the next thing you know, we've got apple trees growing in our house. And it's like, we got to get these out of here, kids. People are really thinking about not only growing food, but where those seeds are actually coming from. Because it's no different than lettuce coming up from California, right? I think that when you pay attention to where your seeds come from, you're supporting your local community. And if you're supporting the farmers that are growing your seeds, they're going to be there for you next year.